It's my distinct honor to introduce our first special guest, who will kick off our first panel here. And his name is familiar to many of you, Dr. Starr. And Dr. Starr has launched at the NIH, National Institutes of Health, NIDDK, a very interesting initiative called the Kidney Precision Medicine Project. And AAKP has the honor of being on the steering committee of that. We also have representation on the external evaluation panel for that. And the goal of it is to involve more patients in the study of disease through a number of different means, to get at the core of how different kidney diseases, plural, happen, how they impact patients, and do a longitudinal study that would benefit not just one sector, but all sectors. Without further ado, I'll ask Dr. Starr to come up. He'll be our first speaker, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our other panel speakers after that.
I want to thank this organization for all that you do, for your outreach, for your education, for your convening, and for teaching us to keep patients first and to keep patient issues at the forefront of what we think about and to design them into the studies that we're doing. This has been an evolving process for sure, but I'm glad that you've taught us how to do that. We've also worked very closely with, I think, 11 out of the 12 speakers, and I've now met the 12th speaker here. So I want to thank you all for us being able to help you with all your projects. Some of you were funding, some of you were trying to get money from. One of the things that I want to show is how the government can work for you. We are responsive to you. We get money from you as taxpayers. I want to show you what we're trying to do in return to help you solve three critical questions that all the patients involved in AAKP know about, which is, what do I have? What's going to happen to me? And what can I do about it? I think those are three, and there's a fourth question that comes occasionally. What does it mean for my family? So those are the really critical questions I think that you're importantly interested in, that we are interested in, and that's what this project that I'll talk to you about is intended to try and help solve. If there's time permitting, I have two other projects that I want to talk about. One relates to a later talk, which is a clinical trial network that we're about to stand up pretty soon that's involved in pain treatment for patients on dialysis to try and get them off opioids, which is a critical issue. And the third one has to do with something called e-care that's moving information back and forth with the patient as they go in and out of hospitals to a dialysis unit, to their own provider, et cetera. We recognize that problem. So let's get started. And Richard says that I'm responsible for this project. That is not true. These are the people that are responsible for this project, including 20 patient participant collaborators who come to all the meetings, who have learned about this project, who are actively involved in it, who when they talk about their project, they talk about our project, and they've helped us stay focused on what we need to do. Yes, there are 100 scientists and 20 or 30 people involved in oversight of the project, but it's the patients and their patient panels at every day of all of our steering committee meetings that keep us focused on what the project is. So a quick review, and many of you know this. This is sort of a very, very simplistic version of what nephrology looks like in 2018, in this year. We have two major diseases. They're acute and chronic kidney disease, but as Richard already told us, each of these is really multiple diseases, and there should be S's after each of these terms. For chronic kidney disease, we have two drugs, maybe a third one coming on. We have ACE and ARBs, and maybe SGLT2 inhibitors coming on soon, but that's really all we have. In acute kidney injury, it's actually pretty dismal. We have fluids and tincture of time, and that's it. The reason for the white space around the rest of the slide is that we really have very little else to offer our patients, and this is a complete travesty, and this is what we're trying to do something about. Yes, we have dialysis. Yes, dialysis is life-saving, but We want to avoid dialysis. That's the plan here. So the white space to a drug company can look like opportunity. To a patient, it looks pretty depressing because it means you really don't know, you don't have the therapeutic armamentarium that we need to treat you. So acute and chronic kidney diseases are major health problems. CKD is the other silent killer beyond heart disease. As I talked about, there are few treatments. Drug development has largely stalled, although we're seeing increasing signs of it, because it's hard for the pharmaceutical companies to prioritize the various targets. We understand animal disease pretty well, but we really don't understand human chronic kidney disease, and we have no understanding of what human acute kidney injury is beyond what was studied 40 or 50 or 60 years ago. So we don't know what it is on treatment for ACE and ARBs. The patients want to know, as I've talked about, what do I have? What's going to happen to me? What can I do about it? And what does it mean for my family? What we're looking to try and supply is a more precision medicine-based approach of getting the right approach into the right patient at the right time. That's the mantra. You're hearing it in the cancer field and oncology more and more. Our goal is to try and import this into nephrology. So what could the future look like? Well, the future could look like Star Trek. You could have your tricorder and you scan the patient and the screen, it pops up, okay, this is what the patient have, this is what it means, and this is what to do about it. Here, take these 2 pills, you'll regrow a kidney, overnight. And we have a project like that. It's called Rebuild a Kidney, but it's not going to happen overnight. This is a 10 to 20 year project, but NIH is there for these long-term projects. This is what we do. But what do we do in the meantime? So the future could look like something like this, where you, nephrologist or internal medicine doc sees the patient, does some simple blood tests, scan the area for what's working and what's not working, and do what they do in the cancer field, a fusion-guided ultrasound or CT, into the areas that look good, into the areas that don't look good, take a biopsy out, and then analyze the biopsy with something that I'll talk about called the Kidney Tissue Atlas. But it's basically saying, here are the cells that we're looking at, here are the areas that look normal, here are the areas that are injured, and we look in those injured areas, we can see that that cell's headed in a good direction, it's going to repair, that cell's headed in a bad direction, it's not going to repair, and what we'll do is we'll tell you of those CKDs, what type of CKD you have, CKD A, B, C, D, E, they'll be called something else, the subgroup, and the prognosis, and give you an idea of what drug, based on the individual, what's going on in those cells that appear to be heading in the bad direction in some corner of the kidney, what drug should be given to that particular patient. So this is the individualized therapy. This could be the future. This project is to get there. This project we've called the Kidney Precision Medicine Project. It is a long-term project. This is not a drug company 3-year project. We are not pretending this can happen in 3 years. It can't. It will take 10 or 15 years. What we want to do is to understand and treat human kidney disease by ethically and safely obtaining kidney biopsies from patient participant collaborators who have all kinds of AKI and CKD, not just the odd ducks that are survived, that may get a biopsy right now because they don't quite fit into a diagnostic category, but to try and do this for everyone. To find the subgroups that will then tell us what pathways are going on, what pathways are perturbed in the cells that we're looking at, to devise individual treatments. This will do a couple things. It will increase our knowledge base of what human disease is. It will also make the field of nephrology a lot more attractive because we'll have a lot more information to base our scientific knowledge base on, and a lot more scientific opportunities for how to move the field forward. We hope that more young people will come into nephrology because we'll see this as an area of opportunity to study, because it will be based on human disease, not cell lines, not animals. And improve the pipeline of drugs, obviously. Now, to get there is not going to be easy, and we need a bunch of culture changes. And we're going into this project, we hope, with eyes pretty wide open of what's needed. So there's a lot of technology challenges, which I will talk about. But that's probably the easiest part of it. The harder part is to change this culture around biopsy, because nephrologists stopped doing kidney biopsies in most patients with CKD and all patients with AKI about 40 or 50 years ago, because we had the hubris to think we knew what we were doing. That turned out to be a bad decision and has led us to this vacuum of information where we are right now. This project has to change that into making a biopsy useful to obtain, because what I really want is the patients, you guys, to go to your nephrologist and demand, I want a kidney biopsy. How come you're not doing a kidney biopsy? That's where we need to be. But to get there, we need to develop a new pathology that makes the biopsy useful. We need to have the subgroups and individualized treatments to make that information, to make the biopsy worth doing. That's what's going to drive this whole process. It involves new pathologists, new nephrologists, and patient understanding of what we're doing. It's all linked and will require some funding. So this is a kidney biopsy. How many of the patients in the room have had a kidney biopsy, either to your own kidneys or your transplanted kidneys? Right, quite a few. How many have had that to your own kidneys? Fewer. Okay, so that's kind of typical. In glomerular disease, we biopsy that because we think will influence what we do. In chronic kidney disease, we haven't been. This project wants to change that. So this is what a kidney biopsy looks like. It's usually done under ultrasound guidance. There are some risks. There's some risks of bleeding. There's a tiny, tiny risk of death, but we have to acknowledge it and be frank about it and honest about it. We've talked to a variety of patients, researchers, ethicists, et cetera, at a meeting a couple of years ago to go through the ethics of a kidney biopsy and of doing a research biopsy, kidney biopsy. And it is ethical if done safely, carefully, and with the understanding that you're going to probe that kidney tissue and get all the knowledge you can out of it. And we think right now the balance has changed, the technologies have changed over the last couple of years, that we can get more information out of that biopsy than we could before, and that's what makes this project possible. So the goal here is to create a culture where the clinical biopsy provides useful information to target therapy. This is what a kidney biopsy looks like when you look at it and take a thin slice and look at it under the microscope. We stain with a couple stains, and we do essentially one color imaging. That's it. What we'd like to do in the future is have it look something like this. Okay, I pulled this off the internet, full disclosure. but the idea is don't just stain for one or two things, stain for 10 or 20 or better yet, 40 things. That's the target that we're trying to get to. There are some technologies that maybe can stain for 60, 80, 100, even 500,000 things. That's a few years off, but the technology is moving so quickly that we think we're actually going to get to the 40 very, very quickly. I mean, there's a paper in Science that has done this already, but one paper does not mean it's doable. Okay, so we want to build something called a kidney tissue atlas. What's an atlas? Well, you know, an atlas is a collection of maps. So this is about building maps of what is where. Usual atlas shows you, what countries are where and who's the leader and how many people are in it and their economy, what does it look like. What the kidney atlas will do is we'll have multiple maps that show us the architecture of the kidneys, what cells are where are the blood vessels, those are the forgotten component in the kidney, what are the structures there, how do they work? That's been the real bugaboo. That's what we want to get to. And then interactions between the cells, that tells you what's there, but what we want to know is more of what does it mean and how can I treat what's gone wrong. This is what it will look like. Again, I pulled most of these off the internet, so they're somewhat random, but one of them is real. You can tell me later which one. But the idea here is to analyze single cells, one at a time, to find the markers. What markers will mark the individual cells in the kidney? So we're not like the radiologist saying there's a problem here in your heart somewhere. It's that cell's causing a problem. What is that cell thinking about? How do the areas look different? This part of the kidney looks okay, but this corner over here doesn't look so good. That's the part that we're worried about. That's the part that we want to target. And what's that cell thinking? And we may need, in some cases, 3D imaging, the last two on the bottom right, because parts of the kidney, particularly the blood vessels and the glomerulus, are very hard to see on a single thin section. You have to stack them up to be able to figure out who's talking to whom and where the bad signals are. Now, the next couple of slides get a little bit technical, but I want to introduce them with this leaf. So this is a leaf. You're out on a hike, and you brush up against it, and you wonder, I wonder what that was. So you can go to the internet and Google leaf, and the internet will tell you what that leaf is made out of. That there's, it's got a stem, and it's attached to a tree, and whatever. And here's where the chlorophyll is. But that's not the useful information. What you really want to know is, what does it mean that I brushed up against this leaf? That's the patient outcome piece that takes years to collect. So you go to a leaf identification card, and it tells you, well, this is poison ivy, and you just touched it, so you're likely to itch. But if you don't want to itch, maybe you ought to apply some topical steroids. So it's this leaf identification card that this kidney tissue atlas is trying to make. It's not just what is where. We've done that, and we're doing that. It's what does it mean? So here's the technical part. What we do is we take the tissue, we break it apart into single cells. That tells us what's where. We get some markers. But the harder part, the right-hand part of the slide, where we put everything back together with patient information from following the patients for a couple of years or 5 years or 10 years, which is what it takes to understand the trajectory of some patients with both either acute or chronic kidney disease and correlate with the clinical outcomes. That's the part that we're trying to figure out how to do. I'll be honest, we know how to do the left part. The right part is still a bit of a mystery, but we think we know. We have a first approach to it. Okay. The idea here is a basket trial to individualized therapy to say, okay, you have this kind of kidney disease, you need this therapy. You have this kind of kidney disease, you need some other kind of therapy. This is being done there's a project we're about to get where people are thinking about doing this in glomerular disease. We want to move this to the larger issue of chronic kidney disease and acute kidney injury. The organization looks something like this. There are, at the moment, 6 funded recruitment sites, 5 funded tissue interrogation sites that interrogate the biopsies, a central hub that gets all the information. NIH, NIDDK is putting in about $7.5 million. It's actually closer to probably $8.5 million or so per year into this project. And we are looking for help. We're looking for help from pharma and from various other groups, because although we have enough to get started, we probably don't have enough to get to the full scale of this project. Now, the important part of this project, as I've mentioned, is keeping the patient front and center. And this is our first project where we have engaged the community. We've engaged a couple of you in the room to help us. Many of the patients that were with you yesterday were also part of KPMP. And what they do is they tell us their stories. They keep on reminding us why they are in this project, why we need to move faster. They can convey to us their experiences, inform us on why research is important, and make sure that we do the right things. And they have already shaped part of this study. They've done the obvious thing. Well, not so obvious. They've written the first draft of the informed consent document, that 30-page legal thing that nobody understands. They've tried to force us, and they've helped us write it in English so they can understand it. They now want to write it over a 1-page summary of it with figures and diagrams to make it completely understandable to patients. That's terrific. The other thing that they've done is they've forced us, and correctly so, to figure out, since this is a research biopsy, if 1 or 2% of the patients have a bleeding episode, the patient shouldn't pay for that. The study should pay for it. So we're now in the process of trying to find insurance to cover that, and have found it and are working through the fine details and hope that some of the people in the room will help pay for that, because the government can't pay for that kind of insurance. But other people are stepping up to do it. Again, they keep us on track, and there is a whole subgroup, the KPMP Community Engagement Group, that does this. Richard leads it with Kathy Tuttle, and they're also working with us on payment for lost work and return of results. So these are things that are critically important for a study to do, and we want to do it properly. And getting immediate feedback, that looks good, not so good, has been really very helpful. This is the first of 2 studies, this one and the Apollo project, where we're doing this, and it is making a difference. And Paul Conway, where he did, has devised the first stab of the communication plan. He did it on the back of a napkin. Thank you, Paul. Or maybe a piece of paper. And we know that the patients, that this is going to be largely work by word of mouth. The patients are going to help us recruit other patients into this study. It is unique, certainly in our institute and across NIH, to do it this way, and we hope that this is the model of the future. The other piece is we want to try and convert this into a patient public-private partnership. We're involving all elements of the renal community because we have enough to get started to do the pilots, but as we scale up, we're going to need more funding, and we have some ways to do that. So we need your help. So there are two other projects I want to talk about. The first relates to one of the later talks on pain management. I didn't realize that AAKP had been involved in getting some money to NIH to work on the pain crisis. So I want to thank you, Paul, for doing that. It turns out that NIDK applied for some of that money, and we got it. So we will be doing a study of pain management in dialysis patients. So background. As many of you know, dialysis patients have a lot of pain. And when you do the studies, and people in my group published a New England Journal paper maybe 6 months or 12 months ago exactly on this topic, the dialysis patients have pain, I think it was about 5 or 7-fold more prevalent than the rest of the United States population. So it's a big issue. And what we applied for and got is money to do a large study in dialysis patients of improving pain management. The details of exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to do it are yet to be worked out, but we'd appreciate some feedback from you folks of how to do that. We'll be having a meeting soon where we will be asking that question of, now that we have the money, what exactly do we do? So that's project 2. Project 3 is something called eCare. And I've seen this with my own father, who was hospitalized for pneumonia, came out of the hospital with about 60 pages of stuff, of which 60 pages were complete gibberish and garbage and not worth anything. What we think is needed is when patients move back and forth from one healthcare provider to another, to have a package of information that has what they want. If you're chronic kidney disease patient heading towards dialysis, if you've decided you want this kind of access and this kind of dialysis or this kind of transplant, then that information should be able to travel with you. So this is a living document that would have the patient decisions that have been made, the important patient information, your diet, nutrition information, all kinds of things in it, viewable from a patient, from a healthcare provider, from a nurse, from a psychologist, whatever, anybody helping you. And we've assembled a team to be working on it. It's actually going quite well. We've had to come up with some new, the sort of dictionary kinds of terms for interfacing with the EHR. We've actually been doing that. We've gotten the pipelines worked out. It's in pilot phase now to be tested. And we have in the process of applying to money from the POCR, the Patient Oriented Research Initiative Trust Fund. Somebody's going to be talking about that later today to get money to actually finish up this project. So we're really excited about it. Richard and others have helped us think through it. We think it's going to be helpful not just in dialysis patients, not just in CKD patients, but across the board to people like my father who, you leave the hospital and you want to know, what should I do? And that's what will be in it, not 80 pages of complete garbage. Richard, you were just in the hospital. I'm sure you got that, right? You got that stack. All of the patients in the room who've, been in and out of hospitals. You know what that looks like. And this is to try and make it actually useful to you and to everyone. Because your healthcare, what we know, and I know this from taking care of dialysis patients in the past, is that you go in and out of hospitals, and nobody knows exactly what happened, and you have to call the hospital, what really happened. And we need some way of exchanging information, because if we can't do that, we're going to continue to have problems. So those are working on many, many, many projects, but those are the 3 that I thought I would highlight today, and hopefully I've left some time for questions either now or later. Okay, maybe later. Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Starr. So, continuing on with our panel, Major Innovations in the Federal Sector of Research and Trials, I'll take a minute here to introduce, I'll introduce our next two speakers and ask them to come up to the front table here. But before I start that, Dr. Starr hit on something that was very important. He talked about attracting young doctors and young individuals who are interested in science through major innovations that happen. And very much the work of FDA and CMS and NIH, what it's designed to do is capture imagination. And you're going to hear from one of our next speakers about an effort through HHS to do that. But I wanted to take this minute to recognize somebody who had the courage to come down here with us today. Her father is a major fan of the American Association of Kidney Patients. He's a veteran. He's an active participant in our Veterans Health Initiative. His name is Michael Murphy, U.S. Marine Corps veteran. His daughter, Stephanie Murphy, is a top science student at Falls Church High School. She's interested in pursuing science and science research. Just want to take a minute and recognize Stephanie Murphy. Thanks for being here. So what I'd like to do now is introduce another leader from a cabinet agency, HHS. His name is Sandeep Patel. Sandeep is the Open Innovation Manager at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and is also the project manager of Kidney X. And many of you may have heard about this. This is an exciting partnership between the American Society of Nephrology and HHS, designed to capture imagination, bring together all sectors of the federal government and innovation to start thinking about how do you transform kidney care through the federal government. The role of HHS is to enhance and protect the health and well-being of Americans by fostering advancements in medicine and public health and social sciences. And Sandeep does a fantastic job as a U.S. civil servant doing that every day. After Sandeep speaks, our third speaker in this opening session will be Greg Martin. And Greg is the Deputy Chief of Engagement and Dissemination for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or what we call PCORI. He's a big fan of ours. We've worked closely with him. Many of our patients have been engaged. PCORI has actually funded close to 17 or 18 major studies at close to $70 million over the past 8 years in the kidney field. Our own board member, Dave White, is head of their patient engagement committee for PCORI, and we appreciate your work, Dave, in educating people about it and involving fellow patients in it very much. PCORI was established to fund research that can help patients and help them better care for themselves, but to make well-informed patients at the center of science and research deliberations. They've done a good job on that, and it's a pleasure to work with them. So if Sandeep could come up, and then following Sandeep, we'll hear from Greg. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. So thank you, Paul. Thanks, Richard, and the members of the AAKP for the invitation to speak today. So I wanted to tell you, I'm trying to get my bearings. Okay. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about an exciting initiative that we're launching that we're calling the Kidney Innovation Accelerator, or Kidney X. And the basic idea is we want to spur innovation broadly in the development of new therapies, of diagnostics, of prevention of kidney diseases broadly. And we're taking an effort that's a partnership at heart across sectors for this. So Dr. Starr, I think, told you the state of care and science fairly well, so I'm not going to go over that too much. And I'm basically going to start by saying the system for care is unsustainable right now. So $34 billion annually from Medicare goes to pay for end-stage renal disease care. It's the only diagnosis that's automatically covered by Medicare, as you all know, I'm sure. Which, just think about that number for a minute. That's roughly the equivalent of the NIH research budget, right? That's about 7% of Medicare spending. It's about 1% of the entire federal budget on this one disease area. And the costs are rising because the number of patients crashing into end-stage renal disease is going up. And as Dr. Starr pointed out, the sort of state of care is not where we want it to be, right? So if you look at the number of the drugs that were approved by the FDA in the last decade or so in this space, there's a handful of them. Most of them are symptom management drugs. With one exception recently, where tolvaptan was approved to slow progression of PKD. There's not much out there. Compare this to cancer, oncology, right? Where in the last 3 years alone, there were 29 new drugs approved, right? So there's a difference in scale here. As I'm sure you all know, dialysis, when it was invented, is a life-saving measure, right? It was a medical breakthrough that saved people's lives. But it hasn't fundamentally changed in the decades since it was introduced. There have been many improvements, but fundamentally, it's the same. I do want to point out that I think there's a number of really great innovations that have happened over the years in terms of care, right? So we have the Medicare ESRD program, which I just mentioned, which laid the groundwork pretty much for dialysis to be available broadly to all patients. It's a highly distributed system of care, right? You can go to a dialysis clinic pretty much anywhere in the country. And, because of the number of symptom management drugs, the mortality rates have gone down over time. And costs actually have gone down per patient over time. That being said, I think we're all here because we all know that there's significant barriers to innovation in this space. And the way we've thought about this is sort of broken down into the following. So one is that there's not a lot of money out there. Whether you're talking about research dollars, investment dollars, corporate spending, there's just a dearth of capital out there for investments in this space. And even if there was money, there actually aren't too many investable companies or projects that could easily be advanced at this point, right? So there's this gap that exists. I'm not a nephrologist. I'm a nanotechnologist by background, but my nephrologist colleagues like Dr. Starr like to point out to me that the kidney is a highly complex organ, right? And so there's significant scientific gaps, as you saw earlier, that need to be figured out before we're going to advance a lot of new therapies. So that's important. It's also, and again, apologies to the nephrologists and the patients in the room, but it's a relatively unattractive field. If you're a physician, nephrology is not probably in your top list of specialties to go into. It's not an attractive field right now for research, and so that's one of the barriers I think to innovation, right? So if you think about innovation, this happens from people. You need smart people in the space thinking about a problem, and so that's a gap that we have to address as well. And there's little urgency here, right? So we've heard about the race to cure cancer. We hear about urgency to tackle heart disease, but we don't see that same dialogue on a national scale with kidney disease, with renal care. And I think that's another issue we have to address. And the last one I think is, to me, the most kind of interesting and one we have to address head on, I think, is this what I call the good enough syndrome. So when dialysis was invented, it was a life-saving measure. In the decade since, we've developed an entire healthcare infrastructure around dialysis, around the care that we have today, right? So whether it's payment, delivery, just the care in the system, we assume that dialysis is the technology that's going to be around forever. And I think that it has, in the unintended consequence of that, has been that it's prevented us from imagining something better. This is a set of slides that I stole from Joe in the audience, but this gives you a sense of, I wanted to sort of put some color to some of the barriers. So this is the investment landscape from the venture community in this space. So on the right, you see year-by-year numbers for venture funding in healthcare, about $9 billion last year. On the left, you see it broken down. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's broken down by disease type. Unsurprisingly, oncology is at the top. What you don't see here is nephrology or renal care. If you look specifically in the device space, two things to point out. One is the total amount of money is significantly lower than what you see overall in healthcare, right? So there's a lot less money invested in devices. Again, though, look at the indications. You do not see kidney or renal in here. So this is not something that's on the radar of investors currently. And so I think in order to sort of tackle this broad barrier to innovation, we have to think about this as a multivariable problem that requires a multivariable solution. And I've sort of broken down into kind of three categories. So on the financial side, one of the things that's missing is sort of end-to-end capital, right? That can take promising projects from an early stage with a clear pathway all the way to commercialization. That currently does not exist, right? It is not clear where new tranches of money are going to come from to move projects forward. And to the extent that we can clarify that or make that easier for entrepreneurs to understand from the very beginning, I think that's going to help attract more entrepreneurs in this space. And I think the only way to do that is to share risk, right, across government, foundations, industry, right? There are places at early stage where it's just too risky for industry to come in, and this is where I think government has to step in, foundations have to step in, and there has to be this shared risk across the spectrum. The perception issue, I think, is fairly important too. Again, I think if we can find a way to create more attractive incentives for talent to get into this space, that's going to help the overall level of and pace of innovation. And part of that is around conveying a sense of opportunity rather than hopelessness, right? People are attracted to opportunities and problems to be solved. And so just the way we frame it, I think, is going to be important. And really expanding our notion of what's possible, right? I think the way, in a previous life, I spent several years studying how innovation happens and how different fields merge together to drive new innovation. And one of the things that I always noticed is that it's always often started from imagination, right? If we demand innovation, if we demand something better, and we kind of imagine a future state that's different from the current state, that's the groundwork upon which we can do innovation. So I think expanding our notion of what's possible in this space will be important as well. From a policy angle, and this is where we come in as HHS, I think one of the things that's going to really benefit the space is to create clearer pathways through all of the regulatory and payment processes that, frankly, I don't think any single person understands the whole thing, including people at CMS and FDA. It's a complex process, and to the extent that we can clarify what that looks like for an entrepreneur early on, I think it's going to help, again, attract people into this space. So I'm going to do a crude representation of what it's like to be an entrepreneur generally in healthcare. And apologies to the entrepreneurs in the room if I get this a bit wrong. But so if you start with the idea, I guarantee you that one of the first things you're going to look for is a justification for why what you're doing has an important public health or healthcare need. And you're probably going to cite CDC or CMS data. And I'll mention why I'll mention later why I'm mentioning this, but and at some point you're going to want money. You're going to probably seek money from government funders like the NIH. You're probably going to want to seek funding from private and venture funding. Some point as you develop your widget and your product, you're going to want to discuss clinical trial requirements with FDA. You'll file submissions. You'll probably also look for joint venture partnerships, exits, that kind of thing from a business angle. And at some point, you're probably going to think, oh shit, somebody's got to pay for this if I'm going to commercialize it. And you're going to think about how is this going to be paid for from an insurer, right? You're going to look for CMS payment mechanisms. You're going to look for private insurance payment mechanisms. And there's sort of two problems with this, I think. One is that if you look at the bottom piece of this all falls in the umbrella of where I work, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, right? This is a stake that we play along the process. And secondly, this is a drawn-out long process where you sort of discover things you have to do along the way, right? It's kind of a messy, disjointed process. So let me describe to you a sort of a better, more idealized journey from an entrepreneur, is that rather than thinking about all those pieces along the way, could we, as HHS, provide more clarity upfront to entrepreneurs where they understand, the public health need, obviously, but have easier access to non-dilutive capital upfront, understand future clinical trial requirements that will help you and other entrepreneurs design the widget that is going to meet those needs later on. I think there's an opportunity to also sort of utilize roadmaps and collaborations upfront, right? let me skip this so that's sort of the basis, and I'll describe it a little bit later, but this is sort of the basis upon which we're thinking about Kidney X and how, we as a department, I think, could better serve the entrepreneurial community to help advance new products. Like I said, our mission here is to accelerate innovation in the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of kidney diseases. So let me spend a little bit of time talking about how Kidney X is going to work. So first and foremost, it's a partnership with the American Society of Nephrology. We have come together for a couple of reasons. One is that, like I said, we bring a lot of the components of what it takes to bring products to market to the table, right? We're a funder, we're a market regulator, we're a payer, we're also a public health steward, right? ASN is a community that brings a lot of broad expertise, and they've committed $25 million to this partnership. I won't go into this, but we're in the process of sort of formalizing this structure with them. But the way Kidney X is going to work is it's going to do essentially two things that'll lead to 3 and 4. So one is we want to offer a series of funding opportunities through prizes that are each targeted at a specific unmet need. So the reason why we are looking to prizes is that it's a non-traditional funding mechanism at government. We don't often use it, although there's a resurgence in the use of these. And there's a couple things. So one is that they're lower barrier to entry. They allow us to fund individuals from broad areas who aren't necessarily experts in this space. So it allows us to look to innovators in other fields who may have proven something. So they're low barrier to entry, they're exciting, they're paid for success. They allow us to shine a spotlight on a problem and get people excited about it. So that's one, and I'll talk about the first prize in a minute. The second is it allows us to, we're going to improve coordination across HHS, again, to serve the community of innovators and give them as easy of a path as possible and avoid unnecessary barriers. So we're working very closely with folks at NIH, CDC, CMS, FDA, CDC, to try to clarify to the extent that we can these commercialization paths that'll essentially provide access to patients for new therapies. And I think if we do 1 and 2 right, the goal really is to de-risk commercialization. We want to unlock investment capital. We want to get the private industry excited and in a place where they feel like they can step in. Again, to encourage more shots on goal, because I think if we're going to develop new therapies, we need a lot of ideas brought to the table. We need an environment where they can be tested, advanced, and so that ultimately, we have a better chance of creating better products. And I think if we do 1, 2, and 3 right, we're going to try. We're going to create a sense of urgency that doesn't exist right now. Again, to drive more interest and capital in this space. I won't go into this, but I just want to hit on the first one. One of the principles of Kidney X is that we want to be patient-driven, not just patient-centric, but patient-driven. We want to ensure that all product development keeps patients in mind, but also uses and works with patients as innovators themselves. There's a general philosophy that we develop a widget and then we go and ask people whether they like the widget or not. We kind of want to flip that around and say and work. Co-create with patients, with clinicians, with all the people that are have a stake in this, co-create widgets at the front end so we're not wasting our time creating widgets that nobody wants. The general formula of prizes, so we want to launch these prizes. We want to create environments within each prize where collaboration can happen. We want teams to work together. We want people from different fields of expertise sharing their expertise, thinking about new ideas together. We also, along with each prize, want to provide roadmaps that make it easier to take the ideas and the early stage development from the prizes forward, right? So along with each prize, we're going to have guidance that provides clear regulatory coverage and payment pathways. Let me see. Okay. So I'll do 3 slides. So there was a recent survey conducted by the Dialysis Patient Citizens that they do every year, and they included 2 questions related to Kidney X that I wanted to share. So one is there was a question asked about conditions that dialysis patients would most like to see addressed. So interestingly enough, so if you look in the middle somewhere is where you see mortality, right? this is the thing that clinicians often most care about and our system most often cares about. But it's somewhere in the middle here. What you see on the top is you see, and I'm sure it's not surprising to any of you, you see things like fatigue, low energy, the lack of ability to travel. I'm pointing this out because I think what we have to do with KidneyX and what we're doing with KidneyX is keeping patient preferences in mind and embedding them in the way we're trying to develop new products. And it's not just about clinical outcomes. It's about patient preferences and what you guys want. The second question is products you would most like to see developed. So right at the top of that list is next generation renal replacement therapy, things like wearable implantable dialyzers, which validates our thinking because the first focus of our prize is going to be to think about how to redesign dialysis. In fact, that's the title of our prize. It's called Redesign Dialysis. So this is going to be the first KidneyX prize. It's actually going to be announced today. But the goal is we're going to challenge the community to fundamentally rethink how we can deliver renal replacement therapy. We're working very closely with another project from the Kidney Health Initiative, which is a public-private partnership between ASN and FDA, that are developing a roadmap for developing alternatives to dialysis, to new renal replacement therapies. And that's going to be actually the basis topically of this prize. So things, the gaps that are outlined in that roadmap, and I won't go into it, are the subject of what we want to see in this redesigned dialysis prize. And it's going to be broken down into two phases. So there's going to be a design phase that's going to launch later in October. The plan is to select up to 15 teams that will be awarded $75,000 each. There will be a second phase that will also be open to the public where we're going to ask teams to develop prototypes, early stage initial prototypes, with awards up to 3 teams for $500,000 each. Again, this is a goal the goal of this is to catalyze new thinking in this space. We want to bring in smart people from different spaces who haven't really thought about this as a problem to be solved, because they likely have ideas that really benefit this community. And so we're thinking very broadly in terms of the kinds of people we want to invite to participate here. This is the first of many prizes to come, just to note. The partnership with ASN is the first of many partnerships that we want to create as part of KidneyX. We're looking for a lot of different sort of components here. We want to work very closely with the investor community so that we're positioning KidneyX to serve and to align with how investors are thinking about investments and meet them, kind of do the proper handoff, right? We want to advance projects that are promising that can be picked up by the private sector. So we want to think about how we can create partnerships that will do that. I think if we're going to do this, we're going to need more than what we have in terms of prize money as well. And so, I think the work with ASN is the beginning, but I want to lay that as a foundation for future partnerships. I won't go into the rest, but the last one is important for you all. We need advocates. We need for people to know what we're trying to do here, and we need your help to raise this issue in your communities. Let people know, what we're trying to do, but we also want to hear from you so that we're positioning this to benefit the patient community in the end of the day. So, we need to work very closely with folks there. So I hope I'm not too much over, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. So you referenced there'll be breaking news later on today on Capitol Hill, and AAKP is very proud to be a part of that as well, and we'll bring that news back to you at this event. But I hope you're getting a sense that, there is a lot of innovation that's going on. There is breaking news, literally. We started the day with that. And as we hear from PCORI, I think what you'll hear is that PCORI has not only invested a tremendous amount in this space, but they have really leaned forward to work with all sectors on research. And so without further hesitation, Greg from PCORI.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here with you this morning, and it's great to see the front of your faces. I've been in the back of the room all morning, staring at the back of your heads. It's good to see what everybody actually looks like, and it's not actually my biggest fear, which was I would get up here and it'd be a bunch of cousin Its, with the hair hanging down in front and for those of you that are Addams Family fans like me and grew up on it. Speaking of growing up, it's always great to be back inside the Hall of States. This is actually where I started off my career, working for the National Conference of State Legislatures. So that job was really about how it is that we educate and inform people, and I'm still doing that. So how is it that we work with individuals? How is it that we work with patients? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And in true fashion, as those that know me, I drank way too much coffee this morning. So if I am getting a little fast, just yell, "Slow down, Forrest. Stop running. Here's the end zone." So I'm going to take a breath. And as you know, PCORI, founded in 2010 by an act of Congress, so to fund comparative clinical effectiveness research. Why is our work needed, though, to fund comparative clinical effectiveness research with a patient-centered lens? It's really that for all the advances that great research produces, it hasn't necessarily always answered patients' questions. People want to know how these different interventions are going to work for them. What's going to work best for them according to their preferences, according to their situation in life. That's what PCORI is here to try and help answer. We've heard from our friends in pre-market and helping to get things to market. PCORI occupies this space kind of in a post-market space, looking at once things have already made it into the market, how do we then assess and help folks make the decisions about what's going to get them to where they want to be. PCOR, what we fund, is a relatively new form of CER, considering patients' needs, preferences, and outcomes most important to them, looking at what works for whom under what circumstances. So patients, they inform us very closely. Clinicians inform us very closely. The PCOR life cycle, and I'm kind of rushing through this as well because I know that we want to leave some time for questions and answers here, and that's always one of my favorite times. So patient-centered CER, we engage patients and stakeholders, topic identification, research prioritization, conduct of the study and analysis of results and dissemination. So patient-centeredness and patient and stakeholder engagement, very important to us. And why engage? So to influence research, to be patient-centered, relevant, and useful. Establish that sense of trust and legitimacy in findings, and to encourage successful uptake of results. We have been working very hard on a lot of these different areas. So patient-centeredness and patient engagement, we have focused on like a laser from the beginning, from day one. Everything we do has been informed and driven by patients and other stakeholders. So this is at the core of what we do. How is it that we bring patients into this paradigm? Not only trying to identify and say and assume, like the old schoolyard taunt goes about when we assume that we know what patients want, how do we actually talk to them? And that's one of the reasons why I'm delighted that we've had Dave, why we've had AAKP with us throughout this whole journey of ours to make sure that we understand and incorporate what patients really want, what their preference is, like Sandeep is doing with Kidney X, trying to understand how it is that what we can do can be responsive to patients, how it is, as Dr. Starr is doing, how it is that what we're doing can be responsive to what patients prefer. It's been at the core of our being. And how do we maintain that? We maintain that through patient and stakeholder engagement, not only requiring it in the work that we fund, but requiring it of ourselves. So we have a range of different mechanisms that we use to do that, from our advisory panels that help us understand how it looks in practice and making sure that they're there to help us prioritize what we're going to fund, to helping us with reviewing applications when they come in, to making sure that they're part of the process of the research, to having them there with us as peer reviewers when we get our final research reports in. So all of these different mechanisms make sure that that patient voice, that stakeholder voice is there, so that way we have a nice, well-rounded, holistic, real-world view of what it is that that's coming through this research pipeline. Why engage? For all sorts of good reasons. But we heard when we started up, how is it that this should actually work? So we developed a rubric with patients to try and help provide some just good guidance on how this should work in practice, in the practice of research. And frankly, having a preschooler and a first grader, myself, gets back to a lot of the stuff that we're taught early on. It's about reciprocity in your relationships. It's about trust. It's about transparency. It's about working together, co-learning, being honest. And it's about using all of those principles throughout the planning of the study, the conduct of the study, and the dissemination of the findings. For us, I couldn't fit my original, nice rounded picture in here, so I've had to go with this new sunrise that I'll call it. And I think this actually works well for us because when we wake up in the morning at PCORI, patients are where the sun is rising for us. We don't let the sun get up over the horizon without thinking about what we're doing and how it can help out patients and how it can help out caregivers and family members of patients and clinicians and the advocacy organizations that serve them and so on. We make sure that we try and have all of these voices represented in our work. Our three major funding award styles that we have right now. Broad awards, we're going to continue to pump these out. Targeted are for when we have very key directed questions that have risen to us from one or multiple stakeholder communities, and pragmatic studies. And I'm happy to talk more about these. As Paul mentioned, we've pushed out about $70 million for 17 studies in kidney disease, and I imagine he went quickly through a few of the case studies, which I'm perfectly happy to talk about more at the Q&A if you're interested. Patient-centered medical home for kidney disease, reducing health disparity in chronic kidney disease among the Zuni nation, comparing the benefits and harms of medicines for long-term treatment of blood clots. The alternative study, I was looking at Dr. Patel's earlier slide with the different acronyms and trying to think what sort of an acronym I can make out of that. After a career in public policy and legislative affairs and a career in research, boy howdy, acronyms are just always driving my family crazy about how we can take every single sentence that comes to us and condense it into a nice little mnemonic acronym. It's a real mental condition, and we might study it later. We've actually put a lot of money into developing something called PCORNet, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Network. So what is one of the biggest challenges when you're going to conduct research? It's assembling your cohort. So this is a way that we can look at real-world situations. We have CDRNs, clinical data research networks, that bring together electronic data from clinical systems, so healthcare systems, electronic medical record data. We also have patient-powered research networks. So these are patient groups that have come together to try and harness their community's strength in data. And how can we marry those up through a common data model, similar to what Sentinel uses, to be able to develop a cohort more quickly, efficiently, and run research more effectively. We also understand that engagement in research is fairly new, so we've come up with research support opportunities called the Engagement Awards. Our upcoming cycle deadline is on October 1st. So any of our friends here that would be interested in submitting for the October 1st deadline know that you have about 48, 72 hours? Plenty of time. But we're going to continue to do these throughout the year. So these have been a very effective way for us to help communities understand how they can be engaged in PCOR, how they can understand PCOR, how they can disseminate PCOR. But it's not only what we've been doing, it's what we want to do in the future. So we are very excited about the stuff that we have coming down the pike. 2019 is going to be a huge year for us. So far in 2018, we've already pumped out about $215 million in new research obligations. So research under our 5 national priorities of assessment of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment options, improving healthcare systems, communication and dissemination research, addressing healthcare disparities, and improving the methods for conducting CER. We've also pushed out $9 million in obligations for dissemination, because it's not just enough to publish your findings and have them sit on the shelf. NEJM is wonderful. JAMA is wonderful. Those are the coin of the realm, but we can't just have it sit in a journal. We need to think about ways that we can all work together with our professional societies, with our patient organizations, to help with, patient engagement and patient research and education. How do we get these to work together and work holistically so that way information doesn't just sit there, that we're actually informing better practice? In June, we offered some targeted awards, as I mentioned earlier, for opioid use disorder interventions, also MAT for pregnant women with opioid use disorder, and advanced illness symptom management, all very important areas. We also are going to support up to $6.5 million to fund projects that can look at implementation, not just the dissemination, but the implementation of evidence into practice. We'll also push out more of our broad funding announcements in the coming year. And finally, one of the things that I'm very excited about is that we're stepping into systematic reviews. So we commissioned our first 4 systematic review updates with the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, all of which are delivering. And we're excited to be doing at least 1, if not 2 more rounds in the next few months that we will announce very shortly. So we've been looking to pull together topics that can inform particularly the update or development of new clinical guidelines. And one of the things we've also heard is how is it that PCORI can be a more effective entity in the post-market space? So how do we look at things and how do we get a handle on things that are coming down the pike quickly? Because as innovation accelerates, as more targeted, precise treatments come to market, people want to understand these treatments. So we're going to establish a healthcare horizon scanning system. Previously, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality operated one. This is an initiative that we hope to start up soon. This will look at and monitor target technologies and therapeutics in healthcare. We're going to put our own PCORI twist on it, though, and of course, so that way, when these products hit the market, we can start to help folks understand, again, what can they reasonably expect will happen if they choose this intervention. So it's going to be a very important area. It also is going to serve us all in terms of helping us get a better handle on what the next research questions are. So in a post-market space, as we try and target technologies, target interventions to make sure that patients are getting the preferred outcomes that they want, that their families are seeing the care that they want for their loved ones, that we can better address that. We're also starting to commission emerging technology evidence summaries. So we've got our first one delivering probably in December on the new genetic therapies. So a very hot topic, a very important area where folks really just want to have a better sense of what the evidence is out there, including clinical literature and gray literature. And we're also developing evidence maps to help us identify where it is we should make future investments. And with that, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your humor. And I will turn it back over to Paul. Thank
you. Probably no better audience in Washington, D.C. to understand everything in life than a group of patients like us. Because we've seen it all literally, and with medical professionals here, we can say that they've seen it all as well on our best days and our worst days. But now what we'd like to do is we're going to go ahead and do a moderated Q&A. And what I mean by that is if you have a question, go ahead and ask the question. I'm going to repeat it because, again, we're filming. We won't do the full Phil Donahue with people running around or anything like that. But if you could, go ahead and ask a question. And again, this is innovations in the federal space. A lot of people are not aware of how these different silos operate and the level of collaboration back and forth. But any questions? Go right ahead.
This is for Dr. Storr. I have a question and a follow-up. I'm post-transplant recipient 7 years. I was diagnosed with kidney failure in 2008. I didn't have a biopsy. My diagnosis was FSGS. So my question is, can you be diagnosed with FSGS without a biopsy?
So the question is, can you be diagnosed with FSPS without a biopsy? And this is from one of our patient advocates, Mr. Rodriguez from Texas.
I think the truthful answer is currently no. Now, what people are trying to do, and part of the precision medicine project that I didn't have time to go into, is to be able to go beyond the biopsy, to use the information that's in the biopsy to create a set of biomarkers that are in blood or urine or saliva or sweat, who knows, and be able to make some of the diagnosis non-invasively. But that's much further down the stream. We have two large projects, actually 3 large projects that involve FSGS patients. One is CureGN. Sorry, the first one is Neptune, which was alluded to in your set of slides, which is a couple hundred patients with a variety of glomerular diseases that are being followed with the idea in the next phase of coming up with this umbrella trial of trying to figure out what each patient has and then get them on the right drug to test whether that structure actually works. That's Neptune. CureGN is a much larger study with longer-term follow-up to enable a second cohort to sort of balance Neptune, to be able to validate certain ideas that are found in Neptune in a much larger cohort. So we're actively interested in patients who have FSGS and trying to come up with better strategies for diagnosis, better strategies for treatment. Absolutely.
And my follow-up question is, just recently I had labs, and my nephrologist called me in the office at high protein levels. They had a little, how it spiked up double, and so their suggestion is to have a biopsy. And the results, I just had this biopsy this past Monday, and so the results on Tuesday, the next day they told me that I had a BANF 1A with, they say it's considered rejection, but it's not. Inflammation on my kidney that would, with steroids, I started Monday with an IV, and then start with taking steroids 40 milligrams per week, and then 30 follow-up and so forth. My question to you is there a limitation on biopsy for any transplants, post-transplant recipients?
So the question there is, any limitations on biopsies for post-transplant patients?
Not really. It's actually more safer to do a biopsy on a transplanted kidney than a normal kidney because it's closer to the surface of the body. But this is a good example and speaks to the issue of individualizing therapy. So just to, in broad terms, without going into the details, but anyone who's transplant or normal kidney who's creatinine bumps, the question is why. There are usually 3 or 4 different reasons it could happen. In a transplant kidney, one concern is your original disease coming back and now invading your transplanted kidney, or is it an acute rejection, chronic rejection? Is it from the drugs? What's going on? That's why the best test right now is to do a kidney biopsy and try and figure that out. Again, looking forward to the future, there are many people who are trying to figure out other non-invasive assays that could be done in urine or blood that could tell you what's going on. We'll hear from one of the companies later this afternoon, I think, or maybe in the next session. They'll be talking about their ideas of how to do this. So thank you for the question.
Thanks, Dr. Starr. Next question. Go right ahead.
I want to build this off from Vanderbilt University. I want to applaud Sandeep and KDX. It's absolutely rewarding to see federal agencies focusing on technology development for our patients and for us. I did want to ask about the kind of the structure for the funding. We've seen prize competitions. I think those are fantastic. I think you guys have put a lot of great thought into how those are structured. And I'm excited about TDX's long-term look down the road. I think that there are investable companies with representatives right here in the room. I don't know what the other people who try to put forward technology companies would have to say. 500,000 is great, but when venture capitalists talk to you and say, "Well, Bill, that's going to be $90 million to get you over the line," 500,000 is an important injection of air into the room so the conversations keep happening. When CMS is putting, $37 billion into ESRD this year, what's CMS or HHS view for how they're going to participate in the funding of KidneyX to bring the amount of non-dilutive capital into these projects over the next 5 or 10 years?
Questions from Bill Fizell from Vanderbilt University. And basically, he's posing it to you, Sandeep, and to HHS, that on the structure of KidneyX funding, given the amount of federal taxpayer money that goes into the space, the size and the cost of the disease, where's HHS on the funding side of it, and how do you envision attracting more investment into the space?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So definitely our philosophy in starting this is we're starting small, thinking big, right? So we're starting with what we have and trying to build out from there, and just trying to get the structure right as we go along. So this is the beginning. We don't, in terms of funding on the HS side, that's a long-term question for Congress for this, and it's worth pointing out too that I think the assets that HS brings to the table mostly are non-monetary. The fact that if you're talking about what's going to drive investors into this space. It's going to be how CMS will pay for things and how long it will take to get things through regulatory review, that kind of stuff. So we recognize that that's probably the biggest role that we can play. And for us, KidneyX is the prizes. It's not just a funding mechanism, right? It's a convening across our agencies. And so, yeah, that's sort of the short answer to that question, is that we don't expect to fully fund projects all the way through commercialization. I think we have to be realistic. That's just not what KidneyX is. It's designed to be a catalyst to lower that risk just enough where investors feel comfortable throwing in a lot more money into the space.
And with Sandeep's answer, for folks in the audience to understand the way that we've structured this day today, is that later on this afternoon, we'll have folks from CMS, CMMI, and FDA to talk about some of these questions in terms of federal process. But it's very important to keep in mind this point. Health and Human Services, represented here this morning, is the umbrella cabinet agency, a very powerful agency that has all these sub-agencies underneath it. The secretary of HHS has a father who spent 3 years on dialysis and is 3 years out on a kidney transplant. In our direct discussions around his table with ASN and other stakeholder groups, RPA, who's here today as well, the conversations have been candid, they've been direct, and you can tell that you have a cabinet officer who is a caregiver, but also somebody who has come out of the pharmaceutical industry and understands how this actually works to get investment in the field. To create the structure and the connections across the different silos of the federal government is extremely difficult. Having driven a lot of federal initiatives, it's extremely difficult. It's rare to get alignment of cabinet officers at labor and HHS and the sub-agencies. That's actually what you're seeing come together. And KidneyX gives people a point of reference under which you drive these different things. Next question. Sorry, go right ahead.
This is for Mr. Martin. What's in the pipeline for PCORI in 2019, 2020? Give us a little idea.
So this is to Greg with PCORI, and it's the look-ahead question of 2018, 2019. It's coming from one of our patient ambassadors, and of course, they're kind of trained and engineered as advocates to look down the road and over the horizon. So,
No, that's a great question. So for us, it's going to be a fair number of the broad awards that I mentioned. So these, while they can often be investigator-initiated, these are also ones that have to go through that very rigorous evaluation of our merit review panels, which are 50% patients and stakeholders. So patients like yourself who have volunteered to help review these applications, alongside clinicians like colleagues from ASN, as well as researchers to try and identify what are going to be some of those priorities and the things that are really going to address some critical gaps in evidence. That's on the initial primary CER research side. As I mentioned, we're also looking into commissioning some additional systematic review updates, as well as some novel systematic reviews in partnership with our friends over at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. So they, as you know, have the Effective Healthcare Program, which manages the evidence-based practice centers. They're really the premier organizations for conducting systematic reviews of all the evidence that's currently out there in a targeted clinical area. So we're going to look to update some of those. We've already done some outreach to some of our friends in the clinical world to ask them, what are some of the spaces where you guys have guidelines, where you have gaps in evidence, that you feel this guideline needs to be refreshed, or that you need a novel guideline? So we're going to commission some systematic reviews to try and help answer those questions to help these organizations improve clinical care. We're also aiming to get that horizon scanning system up and running, so that way we can start getting a handle on what's coming down the pike, and you can start getting a handle on what's coming down the pike. There may be some interventions that are in perhaps phase 2 or phase 3 at FDA that need to be looked at. So how can we start harnessing together some of what's coming out of the trials, some of what's coming out of the gray literature, some of what's coming out of, perhaps even social media, or some of the journal literature that may help us all better understand some of these things that may be game changers. We're also going to continue doing evidence maps. So these are nifty little devices that help us look at what's the depth, what's the strength of evidence in different clinical areas. So that way we can start better targeting research. If there's an area that's been well explored and is now considered to be generally well understood, but it just needs to be tied together, maybe we can do that through a review of some sort. But let's target on those areas where there's a gap in evidence, where nobody's explored that area. And how can we answer it? How can we get to those real world questions? And of course, you also have a great ambassador for you guys in Dave over there, who is going to continue to keep us honest as the chair of our patient engagement advisory panel. So he's been a great resource for us.
If you could take one thing back to your group, Corey, would it be to focus, I think, a little bit more on the clinical evidence for FSGS?
Okay.
It's a very, very rare condition, but it strikes a lot of people. I've had it for nearly all of my life. I was transplanted 31 years ago. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've looked at over that time is the literature and the research. There's very little progress being in that area. There are a lot of people suffering from it.
That's good to know. We're going to revitalize our topic pipeline initiatives as well in the coming year, and that's something I look forward to working with you, working with AAKP on to make sure that we can harness that. So thank you.
So that was a final takeaway point for PCORI on the study of FSGS.